Hello, my name is Christopher Chisholm, and I'm going to be explaining the importance of the Federal Reserve to the American people and why it is important to be knowledgeable of the Federal Reserve when it pertains to voting at the ballot box. When thinking of money, you probably think the United States government produces and regulates the dollar. Surprisingly, that is not the case. The United States dollar is controlled, regulated, and produced by a bank called the Federal Reserve. Despite the word federal in its name, it is not a branch of the federal government. The Fed, in fact, is a private bank and is sanctioned by Congress to produce paper bills and coins, as well as set interest rates and make other fiscal policies. Often, the Fed is written off and little is understood about it. I am going to be discussing the roles of the Federal Reserve, as well as I plan to explore why it is important to be knowledgeable of this organization when it comes to voting. So you may be wondering, how exactly does the Fed work? Well, the Fed is a conglomerate of banks divided up into 12 banking districts across the United States, with a bank at the head of each district. Each one of the 12 banks has a voice on a board. New York is the head of the board, which sets American fiscal policy and is controlled by non-elected bureaucrats appointed by the U.S. president. Jerome Powell is currently the chairman of the board of the Fed, and he was put into that position by President Donald J. Trump. One of the major purposes of the Fed is to back banks in times of economic downturn. Banks can also make loans and borrow from the Fed. Another key aspect of the Fed is to regulate banks. Under President Donald Trump, the Fed recently relaxed banking regulations and burdens with banks who have assets of $250 billion or more. This is an example of how the bank can regulate other banks. Another key element to the Fed is setting foreign exchange rates and giving proper value to government currencies as it pertains to the U.S. dollar. This makes it important when working with other countries and deciding the value of a nation's currency. The Fed was granted the primary responsibility of examining U.S. operations of foreign banks, and the Fed generally examines foreign bank branches annually. This allows the Fed to essentially set the standard over how other foreign banks interact with the U.S., as the U.S. is the largest financial sector in the world, according to the Fed of New York. Now that we have a basic understanding of how the Fed works, let's examine its purpose. The Fed has 6 stated goals. They are public interest, integrity, excellence, efficiency and effectiveness, and independence of views. In regard to public interests, the Fed recognizes that it is accountable to the American public. The Fed also hopes to maintain integrity by being transparent. The Fed hopes to maintain excellence in administration and maintenance. Efficiency and effectiveness are essential to the Fed when carrying out tasks and duties in regard to the U.S. dollar. Finally, independence of views is crucial in an organization that acts as a central bank and deals with American money. In addition to the goals of the Fed has a mission statement of fostering stability, integrity, and efficiency of the American economy. All in all, the Federal Reserve's primary purpose is to act as the United States Central Bank. It is supposed to lend money to the United States government as well as to other banks. The Fed sets interest rates as well as works to curb inflation. The Fed will often raise interest rates to help stunt or grow the economy based off of how it is performing. If the economy is doing well, it will lower interest rates to encourage spending and grow the economy. When the economy is doing poorly, the Fed will often raise the interest rates to slow the growth in order to prevent rapid inflation. So why is the Fed important? Well, the Fed is important because it is the bank that is tasked with setting and regulating the United States government's money. The Fed is a pseudo-private bank that is granted the right to act as the U.S.'s central bank under the 16th Amendment of the United States Constitution. Many politicians on both sides of the aisle have made arguments for how to better American fiscal policy. Some have argued a reform of the Fed. Others would like to change aspects of the 16th Amendment and abolish the Fed altogether. Knowing this, let's examine the stances of America's major political parties. To start off with the Republican Party, they believe that the Fed has a direct effect in job creation, upward mobility of workers, and equitable prosperity. This leads them for a desire of transparency. The way they want to make the argument for transparency is through an annual budget that is required with legislation to make an annual audit required by law. On the other hand, the Democrats believe that the Fed needs a vast overhaul and major reform in order to help better the opportunities for Americans and curb income inequality. In conclusion, the Federal Reserve is a bank that is elected by the people of Congress to have given the right to regulate the American dollar. It is our job as American citizens to be educated on how our money is controlled so we can be more informed in making decisions at the ballot box.